spooky place.
Have you ever looked at someone you love and realized they aren't there anymore? That what's sitting in their place is just a hollow shell, watching, waiting, rotting? Tonight, as you lie in bed, staring into the darkness, just remember, some things don't just watch. They whisper and they wait. Sleep well if you can. Before we begin, I request you to like the video and subscribe to the channel. On that note, let's begin. The hollow gaze. He just sits in his armchair in front of the television. He just sits there, staring, day in, day out, staring at that idiot box. It's as if the world around him no longer exists. His attention locked on that silent screen. The eerie glow from the TV casts strange shadows across his face. It flickers constantly, but no sound ever escapes it. I wonder if he even notices. I remember when we'd go out together, every single day in the early years. He'd feel too riddled with guilt to let me stay inside, so he'd drag me out to whichever activity he'd chosen that day. Sometimes we'd get coffee, sometimes we'd go to the cinema. It was never for him though. He knew I hated to waste a day, and I knew that he couldn't bear to feel selfish. So, every day, he'd take me to do something under the guise of genuine desire. But it was only ever for me. And now, all he does is only ever for him. It's almost as if he was banking all of those hours he spent on pleasing me. Now he's earned the right to be selfish. And maybe he has. For 40 years, I was doted on hand and foot. Surprise holidays, hundreds of pounds spent on birthdays, whatever I wanted, I got it without ever asking. Until one day, he just decided I'd had enough. For whatever reason, he became despondent and started spending every day by himself, upstairs in front of that stupid television. At first, I try to be understanding. There's only so much a man can give of himself before there's not a great deal left. So I took to my new duties wordlessly. If he wanted to be shown the same luxury I'd experienced for our life together, then I'd give it to him. Life and love, they're all about give and take, meeting in the middle. Every day, I would bring him cups of tea, one every 2 hours. Every day, I would cook him all of his favorite meals, 3 meals a day, yet never so much as a thank you. He'd just continue to stare at that TV and expect me to routinely come back to the bedroom, to refill his drink, to take his dirty crockery. 40 years he gave me, 40 years of feeling loved and wanted and truly cared about. This was the least I could do, but then it started to feel spiteful. He started to become messy, not a little bit messy, but very. He started to leave all of this detritus around him and never take a moment to clean up after himself or even apologize for the mess. Instead, he just let me work around him, picking up whatever he dropped and try my hardest not to break his line of vision to the television set. The king upon his throne, the queen turned servant. When he stopped washing, that's when I knew this was some sort of sick game of revenge. Regret for the years spent putting me front and center, manifested as spite. Opening the door to the bedroom, seeing him sitting there with the sun beaming in on him. The smell had become unbearable, becoming worse and worse each day. Arthur, you need a shower. I would say to him, nothing. Arthur, you can't live like this. It's disgusting. I can't live like this. Either you start helping me to look after you, or I'm getting somebody who can, but as I knew he would, he called my bluff. So just like that, a new task for my daily schedule. Each day I've been bringing a bucket filled with soapy water to the bedroom and scrubbing him from head to toe. 40 years of surreal perfection. How many days of laborious care does that convert to? When will I have paid my dues? It's been 2 years since Arthur stopped loving me. I cook for him, I clean up after him, and I wash him. But he gets messier with each passing day. More and more mess to pick up from the floor, from in the creases of the armchair, from between his legs. And no matter how thoroughly I wash him, his smell is just getting worse. I can smell it when I'm sitting downstairs now. I keep telling him he needs to have a shower. He needs to get in there and wash himself a good, proper clean, but he won't listen. He never does. He just sits, staring at that television all day long. My husband doesn't do anything. The house feels wrong now. There's an oppressive weight in the air. The walls, once warm and comforting, now feel cold, as though they are slowly being drained of life. I try to shake the feeling of being watched, but I can't. At night, I swear I hear things, soft thuds, a scraping noise that seems to come from the walls themselves. I used to think it was the house settling, but now I wonder. The TV flickers in the background, always silent. It doesn't even show images anymore, just static. But Arthur, he never looks away. His eyes never blink. His gaze is like a vacuum, pulling all life and sound into it. The smell gets worse, no matter how many times I clean him. The water from the bucket turns black now. I scrub his skin, but it's like the grime is embedded beneath the surface, impossible to wash away. And then, one evening, I touch him, and his skin feels different. Cold. Not just cold, but clammy, like something decaying. His fingers, when I went to pull them away from the armrest, left behind greasy trails on the fabric. It was as though he wasn't even human anymore, just a shell. And yet he continues to stare. The whispers start then. At first it's faint, just a rustling sound, like wind moving through the house. But then it grows. At night, when I try to sleep, I hear them clearly now. Words muffled, but unmistakable. I never dared speak to Arthur about it. Not after the first time. I had been lying in bed, eyes wide open, when I heard something in the corner of the room, a shape moving in the dark. I blinked, but it wasn't gone. It was still there, tall, thin, and twisted. It made no sound, but its presence suffocated the air around it. I ran to Arthur. I tried to shake him awake, but his eyes remained closed. Even though I knew he was awake, I could feel it. I begged him to speak, but he didn't. He just stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, the skin pulled taut across his face as though it was no longer his own. That night, I went into the room again. The whispers were louder now, frantic, almost pleading. The air in the house felt thick with dread. I looked at Arthur, his back hunched, his face gaunt and pale. He hadn't moved from that chair for days. I told him, "Arthur, please, we need to talk," but it felt like I wasn't talking to him at all. His eyes didn't move, not even a twitch. And then I noticed something that made my heart stop. The TV wasn't showing static anymore. It was showing faces, but they weren't real faces. Their features were warped, twisted into grotesque expressions of agony and terror. And they weren't static. They moved. They reached out with their hands, their mouths open in silent screams. I stumbled back, horrified, but before I could leave, I felt it, a cold hand on my shoulder. I turned, but there was no one there. Arthur's voice came then, not from his mouth, but from somewhere deeper, from somewhere inside of him. A voice I didn't recognize. "You should never have looked away," it whispered. I ran. The house itself seems alive now. The walls pulse with something unknown. The shadows move, bending in ways that they shouldn't. Every night, I hear the scraping, the whispering, and every day, the smell gets worse. Arthur's body continues to rot, to decay, while I remain trapped in this nightmare. The TV has stopped showing faces and now shows only darkness. It's as though the house itself has become a part of him, and he has become a part of it. I can feel it, too, a dark presence that has entered me, clawing at my soul. Arthur isn't just sick. He's something else now. I think he always was. And what he's become, whatever it is waiting for me to join him. I can't escape. And every time I try, I hear it, a voice from the shadows calling my name. I don't know how much time has passed. Days blur into one another. The sun no longer seems to shine as brightly through the windows. The house, once a home, feels like a tomb, a place where time has stopped, where life has slowly drained out of every wall, every surface. And Arthur has not spoken a word for days. His eyes are always open now, but they don't seem to see anything anymore. The whispers are constant now, not just at night but during the day. They come from all directions, soft, low murmurs that make it impossible to escape. I try to drown them out, but they're always there, crawling beneath my skin. Sometimes I hear my name, spoken in voices that aren't my own, and in the mirror, whenever I dare to look, I see things that shouldn't be there. Faces, eyes, grinning mouths that disappear when I blink. But it's the feeling of being watched that's unbearable now. The feeling that something is in the house with us, something that isn't human, something that's feeding on the decay of our lives, growing stronger with every passing day. One night, I couldn't take it any longer. I had to know. I had to confront it. Whatever this thing was, whatever had taken my husband, I needed to face it. I went into the bedroom, where Arthur sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the blank screen. His skin had taken on an unnatural hue, a sickly greenish gray that made me want to vomit. The stench was unbearable, like rot and decay, but it was more than just the smell. It was as though the air itself had thickened, pressing against me, suffocating me. "Arthur," I whispered, but he didn't respond. I moved closer, and for the first time, I dared to look into his eyes, to search for any sign of the man I once loved. But there was nothing there, only darkness, only emptiness. And then, as if it had always been waiting for this moment, something within the shadows of the room moved. I gasped and backed away, but it wasn't Arthur. The shape that had emerged from the corner of the room was tall, too tall, and thin, its limbs stretched unnaturally long. It wasn't human. It was a nightmare made flesh, its skin like old, cracked leather, and its face was just a dark void, a swirling abyss that pulled me in. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as it loomed over me. I could feel the presence of it, like a crushing weight on my chest. It was as though the very air around me had turned to lead, heavy and suffocating. And then it spoke. Its voice was not a voice at all, but a sound that reverberated through my bones. It was a guttural growl, filled with malice, like the very earth itself was speaking. "You were never meant to leave," it said, the words slithering into my mind. "He was never meant to be yours." The room felt colder, the temperature dropping drastically. My breath came in short, panic burst as I backed toward the door. But it was too late. The entity moved with terrifying speed, its shadow stretching out to block my escape. In that moment, I realized the truth. Arthur had never been the man I thought he was. Whatever had taken him had been watching us for far longer than I had known. It had infected him slowly, like a disease, feeding off our love, our connection, until it consumed him entirely. I turned and ran. But the house was no longer the same. It had changed. The walls seemed to twist and contort, elongating into dark corridors where there had been none before. The windows were black, offering no escape. I stumbled down the hallway, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. I could hear Arthur's voice now, his voice but twisted, mocking. "You should have stayed," it said. "It was always supposed to be me." The house was alive now. It pulsed, as if it were breathing, and I could feel the cold fingers of the entity reaching out, trailing behind me, waiting for me to slip. It had been here all along, feeding on the decay of our lives, our love, until it became something else, something ancient, something hungry. I reached the front door, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the handle, but it wouldn't open. The door had sealed itself shut. The walls, the very foundation of the house, seemed to close in around me. I was trapped. I turned, desperate, and there, in the doorway, stood Arthur, or what was left of him. His skin hung from his bones like a rotten carcass, his eyes two empty pits of blackness. And behind him, I saw it, the entity stretching its shape over him, merging with his decaying form, a dark, swirling mass of hunger and despair. "You can't leave," it whispered, its voice a cacophony of every voice that had ever been trapped here. "You're a part of us now." The door behind me burst open. I turned, and there, in the distance, I saw a faint sliver of light, a way out. But before I could move, the walls trembled, and the house itself seemed to scream in agony. I ran, but it was no use. The darkness followed, creeping closer, suffocating everything. The last thing I remember is the cold grip on my wrist, pulling me back, dragging me into the void with them. Arthur and the entity, all swallowed by the house. It's been days, or maybe longer. Time no longer matters. The house is silent now. The whispers have stopped, and the TV flickers once again. But this time, it's not blank. It shows a figure in a chair, motionless. A man with hollow, black eyes. I sit now, in the same chair where Arthur once sat. My skin is rotting, my body growing cold, but I can't look away. The TV is my only companion, and in the distance, I hear a whisper. "You were never meant to leave, and now I understand." Thank you all for watching. Please like and subscribe for more scary stories.